Hey everybody, I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. My computer crashed, and then it took me forever to get back up and going again. Yeah, okay, I don't have any viewers right now, so yeah. Well, I was talking to Top Leaf about a few different subjects. We were starting to talk about the budget, and then this bullshit happened. So good. So once again, my computer crashed, and that's what ended up happening. That's why I ended up dying. It died on me. I'm just waiting for Top Leaf to get the message with the new link, and then we'll be getting back underway. Alrighty. So once again, I'm sorry about that, guys. It was a computer crash. I've said that a couple times already, but I know that a couple people... My audio is cracking. 1 second.
Hello. Not getting any audio from you here.
You hear me?
Oh yeah, there we go. Now we're
Okay,
having
cool.
fun.
Fantastic. Alrighty.
Fantastic.
Yep, so let's get this started again. Once again, just for anybody who just showing up, my computer crashed, so that's what ended up happening with that. I had too many applications on the go, and it was a stupid mistake. My computer's giving me problems.
Let's
I
blame it
know.
on the computer. Okay, all right.
Oh no, it was my stupid mistake, man. That's my embarrassment there. That's pretty embarrassing.
I'm just being silly.
Do you know where we were? Do you know where we were when
Yeah, we were talking about the budget a bit. We just barely scratched the surface on that. So want to jump right back into that then?
Sure, absolutely. Let me just open up my notes here. So anyway, yeah, I believe we were talking about the gender issue, eh?
Yes, yes.
The one thing that I remember that I was going to say is that I found it particularly, I found that women would probably find it particularly offensive that that the government was suggesting that they required so much help.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a little demeaning.
Yeah, like a lot. I actually saw that lashback on Twitter with some of them. Oh shit! Don't tell me it's crashing again. Oh, we're good. We're good.
All right.
Sorry, I'm skeptical now. I'm being just ever since the crash. All right. I'm just going to turn off my webcam for a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll help. All right. Anyway, yeah. So that was the one big lashback I saw on Twitter with a lot of women is they were saying, you know, I made it into my field, no help. I didn't need the government there. And now you're telling me that you need to put all this money in order to have women successful in the field. So yeah, that was a big lashback I ended up seeing from that. But then we're really here today to talk about the meaty parts, what was actually inside the budget.
Yes.
So the one thing that I saw, there's a couple notes we'll go through here before we get into it, but they were saying that this was the largest 2-year spending outside a recession period since the 1970s. One of the things that they were talking about, they were really pushing the liberal government, is they were talking about the dwindling middle class, when in fact we're actually seeing that the middle class has actually been growing for the last 20 years and inequality has been dropping for about the last 10. Yet the government is still willing to pledge all this money. We're going to, I think it was $18.5 billion deficit for this budget. And the first thing I noticed when we were talking is it talked about the Canadian forces, and twice the Canadian forces came up, which, you know, it's not a lot for a federal budget, but neither of them actually had to do with funding. The first time it came up, it had to do with the gender-based violence, and the second time, it said the Halifax base was the highest emitter of one of the highest emitters of CO2 in Canada right now.
So how are these budget issues per se? That doesn't make any sense. Why isn't that not internally addressed?
Yeah, because that is something that you feel like you would just be talking about during a regular parliament session, but now they're actually putting it in as if it's some sort of tremendous feature of, well, not a tremendous feature. They didn't really advertise it much, but they're putting it in like it's actually something relevant for our fiscal year. But
yeah, it doesn't seem relevant at all. I don't understand why they would include that. It's almost like this budget is used for furthering a political agenda instead of just being a breakdown of what we're going to be spending on this year. Do you think they would do something like that, Adrian? Do you think the Liberals would do something like that?
Bro, the government always
can't believe it.
The government always has our best interests in mind, and you shouldn't question them ever, okay? They know what they're doing.
Right. Benevolent force. Sometimes I forget. Thanks for keeping me on the straight and narrow.
But anyway, yeah, the one thing too I found about this budget is many were hailing it a socialist budget, which I completely understand. Between all this talk of inequality, equality, gender, and class, there really did seem very much like a socialist budget. And it got to the point too where they were actually starting to tax us on certain things, essentially for making decisions for ourselves. Because one thing in particular is they are going to raise a carton of cigarettes, 200 cigarettes is going to be raised by $1, and now they're going to increase tax on cigarettes with it's going to be every year now instead of every 5 years. Now, I'm a guy who used to smoke cigarettes, but it's a personal choice, for fuck's sakes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a smoker, so I don't like that, but I can kind of understand the idea behind it, because I mean, smokers are obviously more likely to get lung cancer and suffer from a variety of diseases. And so in our healthcare system, smokers are going to see, we're going to see more smokers, just plain and simple, because smoking is bad for you, no idea or ifs about it. So I could see that, because if we are all getting the same healthcare access, maybe smokers should shell out a little extra. But I remember this was a huge deal in last year's budget too. They were slapping taxes on beer and wine, and I remember the Conservatives were calling it a tax on your Friday night. So it seems pretty par for the course there.
Yeah, well, it's just nowadays the Liberal government is just nickeling and diming us on every single purchase that we make. I mean, now one thing that in the budget that they ended up talking about is how making the wealthy pay their fair share, which has been a talking point for the Liberal Party for some time. But then when I was doing my response to Bill Morneau's budget, I ended up pulling up a few articles where it was showing that the CRA was in fact actually going after like restaurant servers and bartenders for their tips. They were trying to tax their tips. But meanwhile, they're not going to do anything about the serving minimum wage, which is a couple dollars below the regular minimum wage.
Well, yeah, that's been the go-to for the Liberals. They've been saying, yeah, we're going to increase taxes on the wealthiest 1% of Canada, and we're going to cut taxes for the middle class. But I mean, if you look at the budget, the tax reforms that Bill Morneau was talking about, which I believe they're not going to put those through anymore. It was going to just tax small business owners and people who have incorporated, just out the yin yang. I'm sure they introduced a new tax bracket for people who make like over 300 grand a year, and I think it went up by like 5% or something. But no, it's certainly not being tax the rich, help the poor. It's been tax the crap out of the middle class and then tax the rich some more too. Everyone's getting taxed more. It's ridiculous.
Well, the thing is too is when back in, I guess, during campaign season for the 2015 election, when Trudeau was coming out with, we want to make the rich pay their fair share. we're going to introduce a progressive tax. The one thing I was expecting was like the super rich. You know, I thought they were going to be talking multi-millionaires and billionaires, which I'm sure, yes, they are targeting in some way. But then I started noticing that they were talking about this rich class can be the people who are just breaking the six-figure mark. And these days, six figures is not what it used to be. It's not like we're talking in the 1940s or 50s where that classified you had a damn good life on a six-figure salary. A six-figure salary these days will give you it will give you a pretty decent life, but considering how expensive life is these days, it doesn't make you one of the top 1%. So this is where I know it was going upper, essentially the upper middle class. And one of my buddies, his dad works his ass off, and he makes six figures a year. I think he makes something around like 150, 200 a year, depending. So he does well for himself. But this guy he's created a program, and he flies all over the world to help people set up their systems. He's gone sometimes weeks at a time. When he's home, he's working with he's still doing business for his company. He's always working. He's worked hard for his money, but now the liberals are saying that he's being unfair.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show that they really don't care about entrepreneurs and people who are in the lower class or middle class trying to break through. And these people are the people who create jobs to help everybody. So a big thing they were doing is they wanted to tax corporations heavier. And corporations always get a bad rap. But what it is to incorporate is just so that your company is considered similar to a person under the law. So you have people who have who have corporations with one person in it who are just barely scraping enough to get by. And now they're getting taxed heavily too because they chose to incorporate. It's when people think corporations, they think like giants like Walmart and stuff. But no, going under incorporation is something most businesses do.
Well, and the thing is too, is for these for when we do want to talk about taxing the businesses, these big giant conglomerates can afford to take the hit. If you wanted to raise the minimum wage to $14 an hour, Walmart can't afford that. But that was the big argument during Bill Morneau's tax hikes between the fall and leading into the winter, was the fact that he was targeting small businesses and saying that these were the people that had to pay up, even though these, again, they were the ones who can't afford the change. And those that were in Ontario, within a couple months of that happening, immediately got like another swift kick to the balls when they had Kathleen Wynne's minimum wage come into effect. And I was working at a job that would that I would benefit from, and I was still against it. I would still my hourly wage would have gone up by at least $1 at least. But I was still against it because the long-term effects were just going to be detrimental, which already we're starting to see.
Yeah, of course. When you raise minimum wage, it just causes inflation. Like, we know this. It's basic economics. It's not going to make a substantial difference in the life of consumers. In fact, it's been shown to pretty much do the opposite. And the NDP has been going really hard on cracking down on offshore tax havens lately. Jagmeet Singh's been really talking about that. And it just seems to me if we didn't have such high taxes and these stringent tax laws, then there'd be no reason for these big pins to have offshore tax havens. They would keep the money in the country and spend it in the country and reinvest it. But because of our high taxes, they're forced to move the money out of the country into savings accounts where it's never going to see the light of day. So if anything, we should reduce our taxes so we're seeing this money go back into our economy.
And we're not getting into this subject quite yet, but that is also the detriment of the carbon tax that they want to implement, is that it's just going to make us less competitive. And when you have Donald Trump in the South, who is doing everything he can to make America great again and make them a lot more competitive on the world stage, we can't afford to be implementing a carbon tax, which is one of the things I think that made Doug Ford so popular during this campaign time, even though so far we know he just won by a slim margin. But this carbon tax is what is another reason we can't be, is going to make us even less competitive and see even more companies move south of the border.
Yeah, well, my province, BC, has a carbon tax, and it has not helped CO2 emissions at all. CO2 emissions have been going up steadily, and the whole premise of the carbon tax was to be revenue neutral. So that would mean that all the money is redistributed into investing in green technologies and rebates for people who use electric cars and stuff like that. But that hasn't happened with any of the money. There was a Freedom of Information request that showed that all the money is just going to random government spending. So they lied and they effectively just slapped a giant tax on us. So now we're seeing like $1.50 a liter gas prices in Metro Vancouver. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's speculated to go up to $2 a liter in the next 6 months. $2 a liter. That's absolutely absurd.
You guys are right next to Alberta.
We're right next to Alberta, and we have some of the most expensive gas in the developed world. And you can go down to Washington, a short little drive, and you can get gas for less than 80 cents a liter. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I didn't know it got that bad out there. And that's actually, I've been hearing a lot of Albertans that have been screaming at the government about that, about how I think the oil revenues are right now are about 50% of what they could be. And that's a lot of money being lost to Alberta, not to mention that Alberta pays some of the biggest equalization payments across Canada. And this is, if anything, fueling the sentiment for a Western breakoff from Eastern Canada. And Eastern Canada is going to be screwed by then, because there was a time when Ontario could prop itself up. And while it's still holding on, it's holding on by shaking legs. And I think right now, if Kathleen Wynne somehow by some miracle got voted back in and had another 4 years, that'd be it for Ontario. It'd be completely destroyed. We actually have a fighting chance now if the Conservatives get into power in my province. But if there was a break from East and West Canada, yeah, they would be screwed, because Ottawa has always put a preference on Quebec over the West, and that has been a huge mistake.
It has been. And what has Quebec ever done for us? They've just continually screwed Canada over in the long haul. It's absolutely ridiculous. And Jason Kenney, the Oppo leader in Alberta, has been very upset with both BC and the federal government, saying that Alberta should just shut off oil to the rest of Canada and BC until they get their way, which is, it's a pretty sleazebag move if you ask me. But I mean, his anger, I don't want to say is justifiable, but it's at least understandable.
Well, it's about time, like that. Like Alberta actually makes a move for themselves. You know, for everything that they've been dealing with over the last few years. I don't blame them for feeling like they've reached this point.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. I think Energy East being canceled was a huge hit on Alberta and just Canada, all of Canada, really. That could have been such a good thing for all of our nation, but it's just because of Quebec there again.
I remember actually near the end, right before the voting started for the Ontario the conservative race, the progressive conservative race, because they were so against the carbon tax. Our environmental minister Catherine McKenna. Yeah, Catherine McKenna. She ended up putting out a tweet, I believe, where she said, no matter what happens, there will be a carbon tax implemented in the provinces. because I actually kind of chuckled to myself when this was going on, because right now, if Doug Ford becomes premier, there's just going to be a unity between Ontario and the Western provinces against the Conservative government.
Yeah, things are not looking good. There's been a lot of outrage coming from Alberta. It's sketchy, man. It really is sketchy.
Well, the other thing actually that I wanted to talk about too was the money going to the mainstream media. So as it breaks down right now, we have 172 million that is going to the mainstream media over 5 years. After that, we will have 42.5 million every year that will go to the Canadian Media Fund. And I'm actually just going to correct myself a little bit. It's not necessarily the mainstream media, but they're talking about journalism. So they're talking about local journalism too. 50 million over 5 years to support local journalists. And then they're also preparing to let these news organizations have charitable status so they can receive donations.
Well, I mean, that's a great move on the government's part, right?
Yeah, they gain almost all control of the media.
Yeah.
But then I was also saying that what about certain other ones that don't really conform to what the government wants? Let's take somebody like obvious, like Rebel Media. Do you really think Rebel Media is going to receive any of this money?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. But
Yeah,
that being
Go ahead.
said, too, there's a few CBC podcasts I listen to, and particularly Charles Adler on Global, and they're fairly critical of the government. So it's not like we're just seeing blind allegiance, which is good. But I mean, I don't understand why the government would need to shovel money into something that, in theory, the market should take care of. It's a little suspicious to me.
It is suspicious. Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right on that. And it just seems to me that the government's doing everything right now in order to try and censor the alternative opinion right now, alternative media, because they're also talking about censoring Facebook just after Trudeau's trip to India, where he got a lot of flack. And this has also been one of the main ways that people who are anti-Trudeau have been able to communicate people, like doing what we're doing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's worrying for sure. I think thankfully we're at a stage of technological innovation where I don't think it's conceivably possible for full censorship of opposing opinions. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that the more the government tries to crack down on this, the more we're going to see it, because people are going to realize just what the government's doing, and they're just going to look for alternative media more and more. Alternative media has been growing rapidly in the past 3 years. Like, look at it before the last election in the United States, and look at it now. It's absolutely insane. Although I guess Alex Jones was just deplatformed off YouTube, so that's pretty substantial.
Is that official? Because I know he had hit his second strike, but is he actually, like, is his YouTube channel shut down?
As far as I know, I believe it is.
Oh shit! No way. Hold on. Give me a minute, and then I'll look that up actually. Because yeah, no, I hadn't heard that he actually lost the channel. If he did, I just heard that he hit his second strike. Funny.
Yeah.
And didn't Paul Joseph Watson get a strike too?
Oh, good. I hope so. He's the worst. I couldn't stand him. Holy. No, I just find him so insufferable.
Let's see. I still see it. Still got its check mark.
Oh, all right. Never mind then. I was listening to a Michael Malice stream a couple days ago, and he said that InfoWars was gone, but I guess not. I thought the whole thing got nuked.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's still possible, because if they got that second strike, I don't think they're going to be changing their attitude anytime soon. So
certainly not.
Oh well. So anyway, that was what we had. We had actually the charitable status. I thought, like, the money to the journalists is one thing, but the charitable status, I find that's a lot more damaging too. It just allows somebody to donate this money and push a bigger, like, a narrative that they want. If it's somebody rich enough and willing to put enough money into it.
Sure. I mean, I can't say I necessarily share your views on that, though. So basically what the charitable status would be doing would just make them tax exempt, right, from donations. I can't say I'm opposed to that, because I mean, I think as long as it's done legally, it's going to be on the records, right? Whereas you can still get money changing hands that's not done legally, and maybe it's just to avoid taxes, or maybe it is some giant corporation paying a lot of money to get their side of the story pushed forward. So I can't say I'm really opposed to the charitable status, but it is what it is. I'm a journalist by trade, right? So I'm very pro journalism, and I mean, hey, maybe I'll get some of that money.
Fair enough. I actually didn't know you were a journalist by trade.
I did 3 years of J school.
Oh, fair enough. What was the last thing I was going to say on this? Oh, yeah. Well, the last thing I was just going to say on this, the real problem I see from this money that's going into these news sources, I'm not actually that worried of the money that's going into the big sources, such as, the CBC or part of Post Media, one of them. I'm not really concerned about that, but where I'm really concerned about is more at the local level, because the local level is still where we have some honest journalism going on, where we don't have as much political influence. Sure, it could still be bad, but not nearly as bad as we see from our big sources. So this is where I'm actually really worried. I'm really worried that these news bailouts are just going to it's just going to actually influence these smaller sources, and then we're just not going to have any honest journalism anywhere.
Yeah, I can understand that concern, but I think it's also should be pointed out that it's very hard to make a profit being a local journalist these days, considering everything's gone digital and people do not make a lot of money off of subscriptions. I'll tell you that much. It's all based on ads, and just it's local journalism especially has just been really seeing big hits economically. So I can kind of understand. I want to give the government the benefit of the doubt and just say, yeah, they're just trying to help local journalists. I would like to think it isn't a buyout. Obviously, that's going to be part of it. You can't get money from the government and then be vehemently anti-government, obviously. So I think that is a part of it, but I don't know. I think there's a real concern about funding for local journalists. I actually disapprove of the government's funding of the CBC more, just because how much of it is government funded, right? And how much just silly stuff we're getting from the CBC, like just ridiculous podcasts and all these stupid cooking shows. Like that shouldn't be funded on taxpayer dollar. That's just silly.
Oh, like to that extent too. Like one thing I found is that if I remember, is at one point Harper had cut about 100 million out of the CBC budget. I think it was 115, which Trudeau reinstated, plus another like 30 million or 30 billion. Yeah, I guess it was like 30 billion on top of that.
Holy.
Yeah, it was like so 115 billion, and then because they. Oh no, sorry, millions. I'm talking to millions. Sorry, they get about $1 billion. Yeah, they get about $1 billion a year. So yes, 100. They got about 100 million cut off, and then 30 million added on top of that by Trudeau. But then recently, within the last year, they've also campaigned for more money to support them. And when they wanted to go ad free, they were asking for something like 400 million from the government, so that way they can go ad free.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. I don't think the government should be giving money to any corporation. Someone in the live chat mentioned Bombardier, and I think it's absolutely sick how much the government has bailed out Bombardier. Corporate welfare is just absolutely atrocious in my opinion. And if your organization can't function in the free market, well then what's the point of it? Because clearly people are not deriving value from it, so why should you have the right to exist? If no one's liking what you're doing and you have to constantly be propped up by government spending, then why should you have a right to be a company? It's so silly to me. It's just needless spending.
Well, the thing is for me too, is because I don't know, maybe it was a month, maybe 2 months ago, I did a video where I looked into the Trudeau Foundation, and I started noticing that there was a lot of the people that were getting government funding. They either had people, a lot of them had people that sat on the Trudeau Foundation. For instance, Google lobbied Trudeau a lot, Bombardier lobbied Trudeau a lot. There was the Bombardier bailout, Google lobbied Trudeau. In one, I think Google lobbied Trudeau more times in the first year than I think they did the Harper government for the last like his last entire term in office or something like that. So that was pretty telling of something. And then, when I hear about these government bailouts, I need to look more into see who's donating to the Trudeau Foundation. But I feel a lot more when I look at it. It's a lot like the Clinton Foundation. It seems like the money flows through there to Justin Trudeau and his Trudeau Foundation, and then in return, he gives them money or something is done for what they're looking for. That's the way I think that it's working right now.
Yeah, it seems like an awfully incestuous relationship with a bunch of greased palms.
It really does. Okay, so the last thing about the budget we want to talk about was infrastructure, because that was during 2015, the election run. That was the one thing. Yeah, it was huge. It was the biggest thing Trudeau was talking about. This was what was going to cause so much deficit. We're going to do $10 billion or $9 billion a year in deficit, and then balance the budget by 2019. And there was next to nothing in infrastructure. There was, let's see what we had here. The improvements to the infrastructure would be 0.2 of a percentage point in 2018. And they were expecting 0.4 of a percentage point in 2019. These are supposed to be the drastic changes to the infrastructure that Trudeau's talking about. And last summer, when we had the flooding in Quebec, he was once again using it as an excuse to talk about infrastructure. We need to improve our infrastructure because, you know, climate change is causing more of these storms. Where's the fucking money for the infrastructure, Justin?
It's almost like he lied to get votes.
It just kills me that people are still defending him.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely ridiculous. I think out of all government spending, I think I'm most okay with infrastructure because it's a long-term investment that will help the country in the future, right? So I can kind of understand that. I do have my own opinions on how the private company could go about doing infrastructure, and I think it would be more conducive in the long haul. But I can really see the idea behind increased government spending on infrastructure. I'd be the most lenient with that, of course, but yeah, we're not really seeing that. Not really seeing that. Instead, we're just going to stupid equity-based programs.
Yeah, serious. And equity, that's like one of the words that we should avoid as much as possible. See, one example that I hear people use when they're talking about equity is I don't know, maybe you've heard it before, is they talk about the racing track.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one where it's, you know, those running on the inside track are pushed farther back than those on the outside, and that way it makes it fair. But in the one thing that everybody doesn't realize when they use that example is the runners run the same distance. They use that pushback to make up for the difference from the inside of the track and the outside of the track. But if it's a 500-meter circular track, each runner runs 500 meters. It's not like there's one that has to run longer or shorter. So it's completely bullshit.
Yeah, and I've heard too that, well, equity, equality is, you know, equality of opportunity versus equity is equality of outcome, which should be avoided at all costs, obviously, in a free society.
Absolutely. The liberal view is supposed to be equality of opportunity, which is pretty much almost universally available these days, yet everybody still thinks that we live in a very unequal society.
Yeah. I've been seeing a lot of pushback from against Trudeau from the general public lately. So I'm really hoping that I don't think he stands a chance to get elected because I mean his approval ratings were 33% in January, I believe. The lowest Donald Trump's ever got was 35, if I remember correctly. So and then he lost a lot of support after the India trip. So I'm assuming he's hovering probably around 25% right now.
Oh man, he's not far off from Kathleen Wynne's percentage. Kathleen Wynne is like 15% right now, or 14%.
Is she? My goodness.
Oh yeah, that's the one thing actually I was saying about this the recent leadership race is all of the candidates were saying, well, I'm the only one that can beat Kathleen Wynne. And I was calling bullshit because all the polls were saying that every single candidate running for the leadership of the progressive conservatives had a better chance of beating Kathleen Wynne. It didn't matter who got in. However, I'm glad that when I say it doesn't matter, it does actually matter. And I'm very happy Ford got in. I'm sorry. I'm talking about that a lot just because I'm still happy about that.
No, fair enough, man. Fair enough.
The winds of change are here. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the carbon tax because they've been saying that they want to implement this. Yet again, like you've sort of mentioned before, that despite the fact they've implemented this in many places, it really doesn't seem to lower any emissions. And you're just taxing the crap out of the people that are in everybody right now. If they want to do a nationwide carbon tax, then it's just going to tax the crap out of every single Canadian. It just seems like they're trying to nickel and dime us a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, I think that's 100% what it is. And unfortunately, it's not nickels and dimes when it comes to a carbon tax like this. I mean, we're paying more than 25 cents more a liter than most other provinces. It's absolutely ridiculous. So it's not insignificant. And I get the idea of the carbon tax. You think, oh, okay, maybe they're going to choose to take the bus one day, or, you know, maybe they're going to opt for a more clean vehicle. But we're not seeing CO2 go down in British Columbia. It's been going up at a very steady rate since 10 years before the carbon tax. It's been going up to the same rate. So it hasn't made any measurable difference. And if you look at provinces like Saskatchewan, carbon emissions have actually been going down, and they're still going to slap a carbon tax on. So it's not about reducing emissions like they say it is. It's about just a quick buck.
And again, despite this, all this push for the carbon tax and for green energy and all the propaganda we've heard from our environment minister, despite all that, there was still a report that came out. I think it was just within the last month that said that the liberals were 50. Their gap for what their plan was to reduce emissions and what reality was growing. There was something like a 50% gap between the two these days. Like they can't even, despite all their best efforts, they can't even come close to hitting their target. And all they want to do is double down on this.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I think this liberal government has been a lot more. I certainly didn't think it would be this bad when they got elected in. I certainly did not think it would be this bad. I remember watching the election and finding out that the liberals won, and I thought, okay, well, I kind of knew that the conservatives weren't gonna win, so I thought, all right, well, at least it's the liberals, not the NDP. But I had no idea that it would be this bad.
Yeah, definitely not. Like, that was one thing actually. I found myself a little surprised even when during the election, because at the time I was still more probably at that time I was about center left when the election came on. Because just my story is real briefly. Some have already heard it, that I was always considered myself a liberal, and then for a few years after high school, I went a little more left wing. Never really to become a progressive or anything like that, but then around just a little before election time is when I started making my transition back to the right. And then these days is now I would consider myself center right. So yeah, actually, and I found myself surprised at the time when I was willing to vote in Tom Mulcair from the NDP because he was taking a much more center left approach than Trudeau was. Like he was still a little farther left than I would have liked, but he really was the much more center left character, the democratic socialists.
Yeah, no, it's the Liberal Party has always governed from the right, but campaigned on left-wing issues. But I think now it's completely not that anymore. It's just gone so far to the left. I think we're seeing a big change in just global politics, that everything is kind of moving towards the left, or has been anyways. I know there's been a lot of pushback from the right in various European countries lately, but it's worrying. And I think most Canadians have seen how damaging this has been to Canada, and they're certainly not going to vote Trudeau in next election cycle, thankfully.
Well, we'll see if we get that lucky. But I have noticed too that the other thing that when I've been looking through the carbon tax they've been talking about, I think it was called carbon leakage. And what this was is when industries tended to move their all production to a single sort of central location. And then this is where all the carbon emissions were completely exposed. So it wouldn't be, you would say, I guess, as spread out across the country, but much more centralized in one location. And it seems to me that this actually a more concentrated production in one area would actually destroy our environment quicker. We keep having to move these productions around because we'd be destroying the water supply, we'd be destroying the forestry around there through our production. So I don't actually see how how this carbon tax is supposed to help.
No, I don't think it is supposed to help. I really don't. I think it's literally just an excuse for the government to take more money from us.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's been empirically shown not to help. So they're just relying on a false narrative to get more money.
And the last thing I just wanted to say on the matter, if I don't happen to forget it as I'm talking, I'm bad for that. My memory is so bad. I can sometimes just forget. I get distracted by something and I completely forget.
Oh, don't worry. It happens to me all the time.
Yes. Was that one thing that's, especially when it comes to environment these days, is have you been noticing that Catherine McKenna has been starting to push the narrative that climate change is sexist?
Oh man, I didn't know she was starting to do that. I've heard climate change is racist in the past. I haven't heard sexist though. So how does she square that circle exactly?
Well, I looked a little bit into it, and from what I can tell, it's because, and this part is true, is they say that women require more resources. Now, this is true, and I'm pretty sure this is mostly true due to the time when they're pregnant. I think this is when they're talking about they require the most resources. Mm-hmm. So they say women require more resources. Since global warming and climate change is limiting the resource options, it's actually making it harder on women, and therefore climate change is sexist. It is actually a women's rights issue.
What? I don't. That's ridiculous.
They're going way left field on this one, man. Like,
Holy.
how could you even sit there and possibly push that as a serious narrative?
No doubt. That's not even like some bullcrap from Mother Jones or Vice. That's like a minister of Canada saying that. That's absolutely ridiculous. What?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it too when I started to see this. Like, I guess I missed it because I think she started this back in like the summer of 2016. I think that was the first time that she started really pushing this in public. And I missed it the first time. It was only about this last summer or so when I started seeing those tweets from her. And I couldn't fucking believe it when I saw it. I was like, wow, this whole feminist government has taken it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, no kidding. My goodness. That's just absolutely ridiculous.
Rico Suave in the chat says intersectional environmentalism.
Hey man, if it ain't intersectional, it ain't feminism, am I right?
Hey, exactly.
Holy shit.
So yeah, actually the one thing I wanted to talk to you about too was I wanted to talk to you about our conservative parties of Canada. Now, because now that Doug Ford is in for my province, I actually would say that I believe that the PC party is now becoming a strong party again. But the one problem I do have with our conservative party right now is that our conservative party, I find, for the most part, are weak. For instance, Patrick Brown, who I've defended about the allegations that came out against him many times, but as a leader for the Progressive Conservatives, really wasn't that good. And he turned his back on a lot of right wingers and tried to invite in more liberals and left wing people into the Progressive Conservative Party. But so I found that they were weak then. But when I look at the federal party with Andrew Scheer, now I like Andrew Scheer for what he does in question period, and he's trying to right now try and do damage repair for a lot of what Trudeau's doing. So I'm happy because of that. But I find that him and a lot of other conservatives that are in power, like not in power, sorry, that are in parliament right now, they're willing to back down on their principles. Two examples I have of this is I've said before that I'm a 7-week pro-choice guy, but Andrew Scheer is a pro-life. Even though he states this, he said he will not open debate on the issue. Now, that's going against his own principles. But then the other thing that happened recently is after the Trudeau trip, the Conservatives are going to introduce a motion in Parliament that would have the government condemn the Sikh separatists, the radicals, the Khalistani. But then they got a lot of pushback from the Sikh community over it. And it actually turned out to be the World Sikh Organization. After my conversation with Arjun, he told me was actually one of the big supporters of the Khalistani movement. The Conservatives backed down and didn't introduce the motion. They completely changed it. So the one problem I have with the Conservatives right now is they're not standing strong to their principles. And that's something the Conservative Party was always supposed to be.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. I'm not particularly fond of Andrew Scheer. I think he's the best alternative we have right now on the federal level. I don't really like his particular brand of social conservatism. I don't know if he's backing down on his stance on abortion though. I don't think it's a winning issue for Canadians. I don't think that it's been legislated into law, and I don't think there's going to be any challenge on abortion in the foreseeable future anyways. I highly doubt there ever will be, but I don't think it's really a good talking point for him. I don't think it's a strong thing for him to run on, and I think he will be vilified if he does run on that platform, because a majority of the population is at least pro-choice to a certain extent. I just don't think it's a winning topic for him. So I think that's more why he said he's not going to push it. I don't know. I don't think it's really a lack of principles. I don't think conservatives should be the one in government who are making new legislation for what people can't do. I'm drawn to the right because I want more freedom for people. I remember there was a writer for, I can't remember her name, but she wrote for The Blaze, and this was last summer, and she wrote an article called "The Libertarian defense of abortion or something like that, I believe, and she was like fired immediately for it. But I don't think the conservatives should make a point of trying to legislate people's decisions. And I know I'm not for abortion. I'm first trimester guy. But I know there's a lot of people in Canada that don't view abortion as the killing of a child. It's just a cluster of cells, even up until 6 months or whatever. Look, you can argue with those people, but they are very adamant that it's a woman's choice. And I think it could be a big loss for him if he were to campaign on that. So I can kind of understand that. As for the Sikh thing, I saw this briefly, and I can't say I really have much of an opinion on it, other than it was clearly just put in legislation to try and further embarrass the liberals, right? And like let's be honest here, that's the main focus of it. We can denounce Sikh terrorism as much as we want, but that was the main focus of that bill. It was just to embarrass the prime minister. And so I can't say I'm too upset with them for dropping that. I guess the Sikh community did have some valid claims. But I don't know. I don't really know if it's super telling of their principles and going back on their principles. But I'm not particularly fond of Scheer.
Well, I guess another example of this is, one second. Just to add my point, just to finish up just our little conversation about the abortion, I would just say is where people don't consider it a life upwards of 6 months. This is actually why I set my limit at 7 weeks, because it's between week 6 and 8 when the heart starts beating. And that's the same judgment for life now. So that's what I use, because again, not being a Christian, I can't really justify it's a life at insemination. But at some point, people have to admit it's a life, and it doesn't become, even if people want to try and make the argument that's a woman's right issue, it is not a woman's right issue when another life is on the line. So that's my counter argument to people in that regards.
Yeah, no, certainly. The right views it as killing a baby, and the left views it as a woman's choice, and it's not a life until it's viable outside of the body. It's just completely different perspectives they take on it, and they've become so steadfast in their beliefs they're unwilling to hear the other side. I don't think both sides are necessarily right, but I'm not a doctor or a biologist, so I can't legitimately say when it becomes a life and when it's not a life. So I don't really have much of a hand in this, but that's my views on it.
Okay. Well, again, that's not what we didn't really come here to have, the abortion argument. So
yeah,
you said something right before. What was your second point? Was the Sikh community, about that area. When it came to the Sikh community, I was going to say the bill which they were still looking. Sorry, not the bill. The motion. It wasn't a bill. It was a motion that they were looking to introduce. It was pretty clear, though, that they were condemning the Khalistani movement, not the Sikh community. So I found this was kind of a little bit of an easy argument for the conservatives to let down their principles on. But again, another one would be in 2018, just at the beginning, Professor Rick Mehta from Acadia University. I ended up doing an interview with him, and
nice.
he got into some trouble. He's actually been in the news again recently for similar issues, but he got in trouble because if you remember Lynn Bayak, the conservative senator who ended up saying the controversial issues about she said some views about Indigenous that got her kicked out of the Conservative caucus by Andrew Scheer. Did you hear about that?
This doesn't ring a bell for me.
Okay, well, she pretty much said that she had received letters from people before in the past. She said she had received letters from Indigenous people that said that not all of their experience in the residential schools was bad. Now, apparently, what was a final straw is she had some emails or some messages up on her Parliament site that were, I don't know, I didn't see them, but from what people were saying, they said it was racist. So she got in a lot of trouble, but you can't just kick out a senator because they're on for life. I don't know exactly what the process is if they wanted to get out, but the best that Scheer could do was kick her out of the caucus. So that's what he did. And Rick Mehta got in trouble because he criticized Scheer, because Scheer said he was a free speech advocate, but then he was turning his back on one of their senators when they turned their back on one of their senators when she got into a controversy concerning free speech. Now, the main reason I bring this up is because we hear like the conservatives right now are supposed to be our counter to what's the rising left wing in Canada. But if they're starting to go turn on their principles, I'm really worried that we're going down a path we can't come out from. We're going to lose some of our freedoms.
Yeah, no, I that's completely understandable. I think it should be important to note that we don't have guaranteed free speech in Canada. We don't have any guaranteed rights in Canada. Everything is completely subject to what the government wants to give us. There's
But that was more about principle of free speech. The fact he says he's a free speech advocate and absolutist, more than actually being lawful. It was more about him standing by his principles, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is just probably about optics too, right? I can understand why he did it. It's because, I mean, let's be honest, the Conservatives get painted with a pretty racist brush by a lot of people in the mainstream. And so to have someone saying this affiliated with the Conservative Party, obviously when it's election time, that's going to come up. I wouldn't be surprised if it does come up. It's unfortunate that we do live in this very hyper politically correct world. I can understand your issues with the principle for sure. I can understand why Scheer did it. I don't know what the right thing to do in that situation would be. If you're focused on winning an election, obviously you're going to want to try and maximize your chances in every way possible, right? So would it be better if he were to silence some people in the caucus in order to get elected and then make free speech in Canada more widely acceptable if it's in the long run? If we get rid of these stupid things that are happening on campus, for you personally, would that make it better if it was just doing this in the short term and then he instills more freedom of speech rights for Canada as a general whole?
Well, if we're taking that at face value, just 1 second. Sorry about that. If we're taking that at face value and just it works out exactly the way you describe, well, hindsight is 2020. So if we can know that this would actually be the outcome, then sure. But my problem is, again, when he's turning his back on his principles, has to do with the fact that if he's willing to do this, I'm not expecting him to then maybe turn around and implement free speech.
Yeah, no, I can understand that perspective for sure. I don't know. I'm not familiar with this case, so I don't think I can provide any super useful insight into it. But I would have to question why Scheer did it. I mean, I would suspect it'd be so the Conservatives kind of have, they just get called racist all the time for every single thing. So I can get why he would do that. It's, a pretty contentious issue within the party. But at the same time, I don't really know if it's limiting free speech. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Okay, fair enough. And actually, somebody in the chat mentioned, and I do agree with them when they say this. They say that the Conservatives have better MPs on their side, and I do agree. They said specifically also that the Conservatives have better female MPs, which I do agree with absolutely 110%. The women on the Conservative side of Canadian politics and Parliament right now are doing a pretty damn good job. Like Michelle Rempel has been doing such a good job at criticizing our Minister of Immigration, who's been doing such a shit job, in my opinion. But she's been so good. Like, she's been one of the leading voices in fighting back against female genital mutilation, both in Canada and also for people from Canada that take their child abroad to have it performed and then come back to Canada. So she's been fantastic in that regards. However, at the same time, I'm starting to see, and she's one of the people I am seeing it from, I'm starting to see a gender and identity-based politics coming from her. Like, and a couple other MPs. It's just, now when a couple things get said to her, especially because I follow her on Twitter, she takes them personally. Like, one I can specifically think of is that there was a few months ago that she put out an announcement because apparently the Conservatives were trying to they were opening positions for the Conservative Party, just like small, the low time positions helping out. And she put out a tweet encouraging more women to get involved. So some people called her out on this, like, well, why are you singling out women? Shouldn't you just say, like, come get involved. And she was saying like how there's less women involved. And one person actually pointed out to her and said, well, how about the fact that that women just aren't interested in the position? I don't think he said statistically or brought up any data, but that is what the data has been saying from what I've looked into. It's just women generally don't have an interest in politics to be professional. And even in their personal life, on average, women have less interest in it than men. And she did not take that comment well. She went on a bit of a rant on this guy because he said that, and just a few other similar situations. Now, to be fair, I know she's been through shit as an MP, and she's gone through some bad shit. For instance, she's posted a letter before of her stalker. Like she definitely had a stalker. So she's been through some shit, no doubt. But she's bringing in this gender and identity politics into the right that we should be trying to avoid with all costs. And it's just, as I'm starting to see this seep in, it really worries me that it's going to take over the Conservative Party.
I'm hoping it won't. I don't have as much of an issue for her calling women to help support her. I mean, obviously there's such thing as female in-group preference, right? So I would understand her wanting to work with more females. As long as it's not mandated, like, oh, we have to have this many of this particular group, whether it's some certain race or whether it's women, as long as it's not mandated, I don't think there's anything wrong with her calling for more women to get involved. But when you start setting quotas and limits, then start discriminating against people because of their gender or race, whether it's discriminating against men because you need more women, then it becomes a problem in my opinion. But if she's just calling for more women to volunteer, I'm not going to make a mountain out of a molehill in that case. I understand what you're saying. We should avoid identity politics at all costs, but I don't like identity politics whatsoever. I want to make that very clear. I think it's very dishonest, but it is, unfortunately, it is a winning strategy.
I guess so. And like, again, I didn't really care when she put out saying like, women come get involved or anything like that. It was more seeing her reaction to some of the criticism of it that would made me sort of take a step back and look at some of the ways she acted in other situations. And it has just, in the past, just some of the things she has pushed, it seems to me, that seems a little too left-wingy, in my opinion, with some ways that's with some of the beliefs she has with women. It just seems like she seems to hold on to a lot of those beliefs that women are kind of oppressed, And it's like, don't get me wrong, there's always going to be oppression and discrimination, but it's not every single type of discrimination is bad, and not every single type of discrimination you can get rid of.
Not at all. Discrimination is not necessarily bad at all, and we should stop saying it is. I mean, every candidate who's ever applied for a job and not gotten it has been discriminated against, whether you're being discriminated. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold here. Whether you're being discriminated against based on your skin color or whether it's what skills you bring, I mean, there's certainly a big difference between that. I don't think anyone should be discriminated against based on their appearance or gender alone. But discrimination, we discriminate against so many things in our everyday lives. So discrimination is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, look at when you're trying to find someone to date. You discriminate against all the people you don't want to date. It's just, it's stupid to say discrimination is bad. When you're discriminating on superficial levels that are not indicative of a person's performance, then I can see it being a problem for sure. But discrimination is not inherently bad by any means.
A few years ago, my wife was working at a thrift store. Now, despite the fact, like, she's like 5'2", she's like a foot shorter than me. She's like 120 pounds, so she looks really small, and just like you could easily, like, a wind could blow her over.
Yeah.
However, her dad her entire life has pushed her hard. So, she has no problem with heavy lifting or shit like that. Like, hell, me and her, actually, when we moved into our apartment, we couldn't fit the couch into the elevator. So me and her took it up 7 flights of stairs to get it into our apartment. So she can hold her own. However, one time when she was working at the thrift store, and she worked in the donation department, so when people dropped off when she dropped off the donations, a lot of people would take one look at her and simply assume that she couldn't do the job. And of course, it pissed her off for a lot of times, because she's like, well, I know I'm a lot stronger than I look. However, one thing, as sort of times went on, she got a little bit older. We both got older, got more mature, and she kind of looked back on it. She realizes that it's really just from appearances. Most of these people weren't doing it because it's like, oh, it's a woman, she can't do anything, you know? It's mostly because she looks like she can't fucking lift more than 15 pounds. But the girl is actually really strong. She's very strong.
Yeah, no, totally reasonable. I mean, so, plus there's probably quite a few women out there, quite a lot of women out there that are stronger than me anyways. Look at female powerlifters. They're fucking jacked.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just also because when we're dealing with averages and standards, it makes sense why there's some discrimination. Like, for instance, if you're going to be a job like where you have a lot of heavy lifting, you might actually discriminate against the women who are applying for the job more if they don't think they could be able to lift the amount necessary. It's not just a discrimination simply because it's gender, but it's just because you might not be able to physically do the job.
I'd almost argue in that case that it would be against gender. Because I mean, because women only have men have like what 80% more upper body mass or upper body muscle. So I wouldn't. If I was in that position, I'd be less likely to hire any given woman versus any given man. Like I don't know. There are biological differences between men and women, right? And I think if it's like if it's in a field that you're heavily reliant on communications, I think you're more likely to pick a woman, and I think that's probably for the better anyways. So I don't know, maybe I think there are viable uses for it. Obviously everything should be taken on a case by case basis, but I think there are viable reasons to discriminate.
Yeah, well, sometimes too, the thing is, in a lot of jobs, if you do lower the standards, it gets quite dangerous. One example of this is I had a buddy who tried out to be a firefighter, and he went through most of the training. He didn't end up actually making it into become it was actually just unfortunate. You know what it was? He's running the obstacle course, and he was high up. He hesitated for a second before he went up a ladder at like midway through the obstacle course, and that was enough to knock him out. Oof. Just the hesitation alone, they said, it's like hesitation can cost lives, you know, as a firefighter.
Oh, certainly.
But one thing that that he talked about was the fact that he had in his class, there was one woman in particular. Like he had a few different women. One woman in particular who wasn't able to uphold the standards. So one thing that they had to do was they had to pick up the hose, the fire hose, carry it across a yard, and then drop it off on the other side. And the hose cannot touch the ground because, you know, if it drags, it could damage the hose. There's a lot of pressure in the hose. So anyway, everybody did it the way they're supposed to. When it came to her, she picked it up and she dragged it the whole way right across the field. She didn't get eliminated. And it was because of they were going for a quota. They needed certain women in there. And it's like, no problem, but they need to be able to hit the standard. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's
same other way around. If it's a guy going into a female job, they need to be able to hit the standard or they don't get the job. Like going back to that story earlier about the hairstylist. If he was a shit hairstylist, then absolutely he wouldn't get the job.
Yeah, man. I mean, you can't just kind of give up standards in order to enforce a politically correct agenda. That doesn't work. It empirically doesn't work. Like, I don't understand why people are even arguing about this issue and why this is becoming a thing. If it was up to the free market, all these companies would just be absolutely blown out of the water because you can't let up on standards to meet people's expectations and meet quotas. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absurd.
One person in the chat says, "Careful, boys, you're limiting your future employment prospects at Google."
Yeah, well, I'm a straight white male, so I'm not getting a job there anyways.
Yo, seriously, you can't work anywhere in that area anymore. Especially, you know what, you're on the right. That would immediately disbar you from going in.
Well, I'd hardly say I'm on the right. I guess maybe. I don't know. I'm not a conservative by any stretch, but I'm certainly not a modern leftist.
I hear you. I hear you on that one. I don't know. I consider myself more on the libertarian right, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm very pro-business, very anti-government, so I guess that would technically put me on the right side of the libertarian scale.
Oh, well, anyway, just going back to your talk about quotas too, is quotas almost never work the way they're supposed to, because the quotas, like the way they're trying to introduce the quotas, whether that be like diversity or other means, The problem with the quota is in other industries, when you insert a quota, it's a drive for people to, for instance, sales. It's a drive for them to go harder and sell more. So there's a lot more pressure in order to do this. But when you're offering quotas and saying that you have to meet this standard for more like people, and then it comes to diversity, then if you don't have the interest in place, you're not going to be able to meet the quota. And in one way, a lot of people have talked about, I don't know. I've heard that the whole cops having quotas been bullshit. I've heard it's true. I really don't know. I think it's true, like for tickets and things like that.
Oh, it's totally true.
It is true. Okay. Well, because the reason I was thinking it was true is because cops definitely will nail drivers and other people for bullshit reasons near the end of the month or when their quota's coming up. And it's just ridiculous. You know, you'll be doing next to nothing and they'll nail you with something. And it's the same sort of thing when we're talking about the industry. If you're just going to hit a quota and then because of lack of interest or lack of people going in, you can't hit your quota, you're going to get punished for it. Or if you're not hitting that quota, anybody who does come in, you have to take them on. So for instance, if you want to, I don't know, just take any guy, like any guy, and then put them into this position, like any race, and put them in. If they just happen to be suck at that particular job, you don't have a choice because you got a quota to make.
Yeah, and it's going to harbor a lot of resentment in the long haul. And it's just going to further and further divide race division and shit like we're seeing in the States. Like, it's gotten so much worse in the past 15 years because progressives are trying to push all this equality bullshit. Just let people do their own thing, for fuck's sakes. Some people are better at some things than others are. It's stupid that we're trying to push all these bullshit diversity quotas. Just let people do what they want. It's so ridiculous.
When it comes to the progressives, I think for the most of the progressive and lefties, they've taken to this ideology of equality. So, you know, that's what they believe. But for the more people that are in like the academics position, and if you want the more people at the top of progressiveness, if you can even say that, you know, if there's really much of a hierarchy, but really the people that make the most influential changes in who are progressives, I think they come from a much more sinister perspective. They're the ones that actually come in with the equality is a means to an end. It's a means to get control. It's a means to manipulate. It's a means to change, but it's not actually that they don't give a shit about equality. And I just think that many of the progressives don't realize this sinister intention behind the movement.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I'd have to see some substantial evidence of that, though. I don't know if it could certainly be that too, or it could just be self-righteous people at the top, right? I don't know if I can intelligently make a distinction and say that is for certain one or the other.
It's just when I think about stuff like no dying on us, man.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's just when I think about some of the documents that are out there, like there's the Communist Manifesto. I came across a manifesto that was like the League of Socialists. I'd have to look it up again. Hold on. I think I still got it saved, so I'll see it. But anyway, these are in a lot of these articles, they talk about the method in these manifestos. Sorry, they talk about the method of how to enact change in society, and a lot of them are things that we see going on right now. That like here we go. Here's one person from the 60s, Herbert Marcus. I think it's Marcus. It's Marcuse maybe. And anyway, got a couple quotes from him. And if you look at what he says back in the 60s, it's remarkably true to some of the things that are happening right now. So here's one. It says, the means of communication, the irresistible output of the entertainment and information industry, carry with them prescribed attitudes and habits. Certain intellectual and emotional reactions which bind the consumer to the producers and, through the latter, to the whole social system. The products indoctrinate and manipulate. They promote a false conscience which is immune against its falsehood. Thus emerges a pattern of one-dimensional thought and behavior. So that is almost exactly how I find that the progressives act now. They're in their bubbles. They double down on no matter what goes on, and they've gained control of sort of the entertainment industry and the media. The other one I have is one-dimensional thought is systematically promoted by the makers of politics and their purveyors of mass information. Their universe of discourse is populated by self-validating hypotheses, which incessantly and monopolistically repeated, become hypnotic definitions of dictation. So these are just quotes, but these are from the manifestos of like how to implement socialism. And it's pretty damning considering, I find, with these it's pretty damning considering considering how the progressives have acted and which fields they've really taken these days. They've taken the information.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. That does seem pretty indicative of an overall pattern of what we're seeing these days. But I think when it comes to things like the arts and the entertainment industry, there's a certain type of people who are going to be more attracted to that sort of field, and on the average, those people are far more likely to be lefties. Just because like openness is more likely if you're left wing. There's a bunch of personality traits that line up with creative people and lefties, like very, very consistently, that don't line up with people on the right. And I think a lot of that could be attributed to that. I'm still kind of skeptical that there is this overall global Marxist plot to destroy the West. You know, it seems a little conspiratorial for me. I haven't seen any hard evidence, I guess. Like what you just read was kind of circumstantial. But I don't know. I'm not gonna say it is or it isn't, right? Because it is persuading, but at the same time, you know, I have never seen anything that has permanently cemented my mind into believing that it's all just a conspiracy.
I understand that. And, you know, I don't try and go towards the conspiracy too much, but just when I see some of the tactics that are used in politics these days that seem to be exclusively left wing, and I see some of the things they say, I can't help but feel this way. Because one thing that also made me sort of suspicious about this was that when it talked about, I know you and I differ in terms of immigration. I've said that I wanted to significantly reduce immigration that's available today. But one thing that they talked about is that the left wing, in the socialist manifestos, talks about how they should be open border, like they should be lots of immigration. And then I've also noticed that in a lot of for instance, the liberals, they use this a lot in order to put new immigrants into swing ridings, people that they know will vote for them because they help bring them in and maybe they're giving them some welfare or some government assistance. So when I don't have anything conclusive either to actually say one way or the other, but it's just when I look at everything, it's just everything seems compounded in the evidence. It seems to lead me in one direction.
I have to say for the immigration thing, I 100% agree with you on there. I don't know if we're seeing it to the same extent as we are in the States, but I mean, I think it's pretty undeniable that a huge reason Democrats are pushing for more Hispanic people in is because Hispanic people are so consistently Democratic voters. Like I don't think there's any arguing that is a huge reason why they would be pushing for more Mexican people in the country. And I don't see any substantial argument that could prove me otherwise of that.
Interesting. Fair enough. If I come up with some smoking gun, we'll have this conversation again about it.
For sure.
Yeah, but it's just, I guess also just listening to a few other people that have talked about postmodernism and stuff. I know that in some of the manifestos, they've talked about like how you need to infiltrate these organizations and then try and get to the top to change the culture. And I know, again, that many other people who have focused on the postmodernism problem have also brought this up. So I just can't help but feel this way when there's almost a use for infiltration. And the thing is, too, is if I was to suspect that there was some sort of, global conspiracy for this, I actually think it would more stem from the Russians during the Cold War, that more of this had to do with spreading the influence of communism and socialism, and that these people, these Russians or these people or these academics that were pushing for socialism and communism and Marxism, it was more likely that they just infiltrated the U.S. and worked their way into positions of power. And then since then, this sort of ideology has just spread. At least that's what I think, anyway.
Oh my God, that totally triggered a memory of mine. Have you heard of Yuri Bezmenov? He was this Soviet defector, and I think he defected in the 70s, and he was a higher up in the KGB, if I remember correctly, and he kind of laid out like the communists because there was a lot of communist infiltration in the United States, right? Like we had what's his face who went off on this and he got pilloried about it, but it was later confirmed. I can't. His name's escaping me right now, but it's actually you're gonna find this fascinating. I'll send you a link to it on Discord. It's really really interesting stuff. Basically, he's saying that there are Soviets who have infiltrated the United States, and they are doing precisely almost exactly what you said. So I just sent you to a link. So watch that on your own time. It's very, very interesting and very, very relevant to what you just said. Have you ever read Saul Alinsky's Rule for Radicals, or at least heard of it?
I've heard of it, and I've seen a few passages, but I don't have my hands on it. So no, I haven't read the full thing.
Okay, I would. Yeah, that's pretty similar to what you were talking about as well. So I would recommend you checking that out if that's something you're interested in.
I can find something online. Maybe there's something online I can find. If I look a little harder, I might be able to find more of a complete script of it or something like that. We'll see. But yeah, I'll take a look into that. And if worse comes to worse, I'll just take a look and order the book or something so I can read it. Because yeah, I definitely want to get. I've been over the last month or a few months, I've been definitely trying to read up more about like radical ideologies and see what sort of motivates them more.
I think when it all boils down to it, it's all the fault of the Jews, though.
The JQ, we're getting into JQ, yeah. Eh?
No, that was a joke.
No, I know. I got you.
It's all a Jewish conspiracy. That's all Marxism is. Even though Karl Marx was like very, very anti-Semitic, so I have my suspicions.
I didn't hear that about him.
Oh yeah, like rampant. He was super racist towards black people. He was very anti-Semitic. So I don't know, just food for thought.
I also heard that he was actually didn't accomplish much in his life. That he kind of sat at home and did nothing.
Oh yeah, well he never had a job. There was a letter his mom wrote. His mother wrote a letter that said, "I wish Carl would accumulate some capital instead of just talking about it all day." And I think that is just absolutely hilarious. Apparently, Karl Marx was a real piece of shit. Like he was just very unkept and unclean. He had boils. He never had a job. He just leached off of Engels, because I guess Engels owned a factory or something, and that's where he got all his money. So yeah, I don't know. Karl Marx was just the worst. Rico Suave.
The guy who created communism and Marxism, really, that evolved into communism. The guy who invented this theory was actually the most useless person, some of the most useless person in history.
Oh yeah, no, he was the worst.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I heard a little bit about that story, but yeah, I heard he didn't have a job, but I didn't know he was so dirty and unkept and things like that. Ugh. Oh, at least Socrates, when he did that, he was a smart motherfucker.
Yeah, no, Socrates was great. Karl Marx, not so much.
Alrighty, Leaf. I think we've been on for a little bit, but a little over an hour, so I'm thinking about calling her a night. How about you?
Yeah, no, sounds good to me, brother.
Alrighty, so we'll convene again maybe in a week or so, or maybe a little more. We'll figure her out, and we'll do this again.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, we didn't talk tariffs.
Oh, we didn't. Did you want to quickly cover that before we go?
No. I have no original thoughts that would be compelling.
No, I don't really think I do too. The only thing I really thought I said on the subject was that Trump's whole strategy, it was just deflection. He focused on Canada and Mexico first and said, well, you need to you need to pay your fair share. Then he kind of switches to, maybe the world needs to pay its fair share. And then in the end, he exempts Canada and Mexico from these tariffs for now, he said. But in the end, I really think it was just because the concern is that China is dumping its metal into North America, watering down the industry and taking control of it. So I think it is for sure. So I think this was really just Trump. He was targeting them. But if he specifically just came out and said China, then he would have had some problems on his hand. Number one, he would have had a trade war with China on his hand. And then, it's not like China and America are great friends to begin with. So there would have been more complications there. And he at least needs them in some regards for North Korea. Even though they've been kind of useless, they are at least the regional power. So he needs their help in some way with North Korea. Although he's done it, fuck, Kim Jong-un's going to meet him. What other leader can say that?
Yeah, no doubt. We live in exciting times, that's for sure.
We do. World's going to be paying close attention to that, man.
Yeah, no kidding.
Alrighty,
Could you
Leaf.
imagine what would happen if he convinced Kim Jong Un to disarm? That'd be absurd. Could you just imagine that? Imagine all the lefties. Like, what would they do?
They would go insane. They would find some way to manipulate this and say this is actually dangerous and bad, and that Trump has actually, if anything, made everything worse, even though they would have had no nukes left.
Yeah, it's oh my god. I want it to well, obviously I want it to happen because, I don't want North Korea to have nukes, but also just to see the reaction. That'd be amazing. I'm not a Trump guy, but that would just be so cool.
I think in the end, it was just that Trump stiff-armed them and he wouldn't back down. All the other presidents and stuff, they really were they didn't want to touch the subject. They tried to avoid North Korea as much as possible and kind of left them to their own devices. But then Trump, as soon as North Korea started acting up, what did he do? He moved a goddamn fleet into their waters and just kept it there and said, okay, you try anything, we're right here.
Yeah, no, I mean it seems to be working. Like it really seems to be working. I don't really have an argument to say like what he's doing is bad because it seems to be working. Maybe I didn't give him enough credit, man. Maybe there's something to that 4D chess.
I think a lot of people didn't give him enough credit because like Trump is clearly like as much as the mainstream media and others and the left wing want to portray Trump as stupid, he's not. Trump's not an idiot. He didn't get to where he is. He didn't get into the position he's in. He didn't get to be president of the United States because he was stupid. He played it very smartly.
No, Trump has been successful in so many domains in his adult life. There's no way the guy's stupid. He's probably, I don't know, I'd say like 150 IQ most likely. Like he's a tremendously smart guy. I think a lot of it is a show because it gets the people going. But I mean, I don't think he's dumb at all.
Yeah, no, and you know what? The more and more I've watched Trump, the more and more what Scott Adams, the creator Dilbert, says on him. He says that Trump's whole game is he's always been about the big imagery. He gets a focus on, and this was one of the first things. Like when he announced the wall, they said this was one of his first time like big strategies for it because the wall literally gave the people something to imagine. It gave them something that they could picture, and it gave them something to work for. And this is a lot of what Trump does with his big imagery and personification. Even if the wall is literal, it's still at the beginning, it was all about the big imagery.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure.
He's played the game well. I think a lot of people can learn from him.
I will certainly acknowledge that. I just don't like. I think everything in the campaign was very well thought out. I don't think he was some sort of loose cannon, unhinged guy. Like I think it was meticulously organized personally, but I just don't really like him.
Fair enough, man.
We can get into that one of these days, but I'm just not a fan. I think he's brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I just don't like him.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, for me, I've said in the past that I'm not mega because being in Canada, I don't know. I just never saw the point of being all make America great again. But I pretty much treat him the way I'll treat most people is that when he does badly, I'll criticize him. When he does well, I'll give him some credit. However, it's just the way that a lot of people treat him these days. I find that I spend most of my time just dispelling those. He actually does, in my opinion, a pretty good job. That's why I don't criticize him very much, is because I actually think he does a good job these days as president. Over the last year, I've been very impressed with the stuff he's done. So definitely, I would say I'm more on the pro-Trump camp than the anti-Trump camp for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily pro-Trump, but I think he was certainly better than Hillary.
Oh, without a doubt. Oh, yeah, no.
Given the alternative.
Oh, fuck, man. That would have been a shit show. We would have, America would already be at war right now if Hillary was president.
Yeah, Hillary represents every single thing I hate in a politician. I think she's just the scum of the earth.
Alrighty. I think we're going to call it a night now.
Yeah, sounds good, hombre.
Alrighty. We'll talk over the week and we'll figure out our next stream.
Sounds good.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This has been the Canuck stream, and we will be back in a week or so with another one. Have a good night. And